Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're so pleased to welcome editors and contributors to Radical Humility tonight, joining us at our At Home with Literati series. First, an overview of everything for those of you who are just joining us. You're in a meeting. If you have your video on now, that's fine. Once we get underway, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps turning your video off, sort of set some stage lighting for us here. That's fine. Of course, we encourage you to make liberal use of your reactions throughout the event tonight as well. The chat is closed. It's set to host only. So you won't be able to chat with each other or us, but you can send questions to me. If you send a chat, it will just go to me. And that's how you can ask a question for our Q&A at the end of the event. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat to send them to me, and I'll ask a selection of them at the conclusion of the event. As a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup if you live in Southeast Michigan, or to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming, whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming. You can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us from. So without further ado, I'll introduce our MC this evening. Rebecca Mojak is a writer and artist whose interventionist artworks resist consumer culture. You can read her thoughts about culture jamming and reclaiming meaning from brand rhetoric in such publications as the Routledge Companionship to Criticality in Art, Architecture and Design, After Image, Consumption Markets and Culture, this magazine, and The Conversation. If you'd like to use your clap or heart emojis, please join me in welcoming Rebecca and all of our other editors and contributors to your living rooms.
All right. Thank you, John. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. Am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So this book started during the difficult year of 2016. Here at the university, the culture seemed to involve more swagger and more boasting. This culture of arrogance was also playing itself out on a national scale as Trump's taunts and tweets emerged on center stage. And in the middle of this year, in July 2016, my family and I drove halfway across the country to a small town in Nebraska so that I could spend a month interviewing farmers about their work. At every opportunity, we put ourselves out to meet people. We sat down with strangers at town barbecues and pancake breakfasts, and happily, we experienced a remarkable difference in culture. No one we talked with ever told us how important they were. No one told us that they were the mayor or the state senator, even when it turns out that they were. One day, a farmer told me that Farmer Ned was the one to talk to. Ned was the best farmer, not because he knows about pest control or crop rotation. He's a good farmer because he's humble. I thought, I want more humble and less boasting. I want to know who else is thinking about humility and ethical alignment. Where are models for this alignment in a world that seems increasingly compromised and egoistic? So I emailed Jamie Vanderbrook, the art and design librarian at the University of Michigan, Sarah Buss, a professor of philosophy there, and Aaron Ahuvia, a professor of marketing at University of Michigan, Dearborn. We started out asking philosophers and psychologists about humility, and at the same time, we were curious how theories about virtue actually play out in people's lives, their work, and their relationships, and we invited them to tell us. A hospital's chief lawyer who, in the face of medical mistakes, decided to apologize to patients and their families. A consumer culture scholar who observed his 97-year-old mother's humility grow naturally with age, but also unfortunately saw her more exposed to humiliation. Reading the essays in Radical Humility is a sort of yellow brick road. It takes us from a makerspace in Illinois to the dishwasher station in a professional kitchen, from a hospital bed to a dense layer of microbes in the forest. And if we pay attention, they may teach us how to make way for new life. I'm so glad you're all here tonight to celebrate the book's publication. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge contributors from the book who are also with us tonight, in addition to the ones who are reading. Here in the audience, I think we have Sarah Buss, Kevin Hamilton, Nadia Donienta, and Eric Reinfleisch, Erin Ahuvia, Amy Walsh, Rick Boothman, Kevin M., Nick Tobier, Mike Zai, Ben Denzer, Martha Bain, Mar Ezekiel, and Tori Essex. And now I'd like to welcome to the Zoom microphone, Jennifer Colwright. Jennifer is professor of psychology at the College of Charleston. Her area of research is moral development and moral psychology. She's interested in how moral values and norms develop over time and influence people's reactions to divergent beliefs and practices. She's also interested in why we care about being good people and how we become them.
Thank you for the introduction. And it's such a joy to be here at the culmination of what started off as just a wonderful weekend together, thinking and imagining about humility. And I'm really pleased to be able to read a little bit from what came out of that for me. So my chapter is titled Escaping the Gravitational Pull of the Self. So as David Foster Wallace rightly noted in a celebrated 2005 commencement speech at Kenyon College, each of us experiences ourselves as standing, psychologically speaking, at the center of a universe. That is to say, we experience ourselves as the organizing center of a consciousness that feels woven together in the form of a life, our life. We experience that life as real and substantial, as something to be lived, equipped with the drive to fulfill basic needs and to pursue goals and values that we experience as worthwhile and meaningful. It seems only natural then that in a world filled with needs and desires, it is our own that press most strongly in upon us, demanding our attention. And in a world filled with beliefs, values, goals, and ideals, it is our own that strike us as the most attractive and compelling, the most true and worthy of commitment and pursuit. It is not simply a matter of our needs, desires, beliefs, values, goals, and ideals being the ones with which we happen to be most intimately and continuously familiar, but rather the fact that they emanate from our center. We experience them as ours, and in so doing, they generate a powerful gravitational pull. This pull typically manifests as a self-centeredness, a self-oriented focus, through which we privilege and prioritize our needs and so on above those of others. They're the ones that we attend to the most. We expend more energy on them, we give them more thought, we dedicate more resources to them, and we allocate to them more time. Yet as most religious and ethical systems teach us, the privileging and prioritizing of our needs and so on in this way is not justified. After all, the fact that our beliefs, goals, values, and ideals are our own does not make them any more likely to be true, appropriate, or worthy of pursuit. Nor does the fact that we experience our own needs and desires more strongly mean that they actually matter more. As Mark Johnston wrote, the truly ethical life is a life in which you encounter yourself as one person among others, all equally real. This means that the legitimate interests of others, insofar as you can anticipate them, will figure on a par with your own legitimate interests in your practical reasoning. For you will find yourself to be only one of the others, the one you happen to know so much about, thanks to being him or her. In other words, living a truly ethical life requires that we encounter our needs, beliefs, values, goals, and ideals as they truly are. That is, as only one particular set, albeit the ones we happen to know best. within a vast, complex, and interconnected universe of living beings, all with equally real and legitimate needs and so on of their own. And this is where humility comes in. But to know more about what humility is, you're going to have to buy the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Our next reader, Ruth Nicole Brown, is an artist scholar whose life work is dedicated to the celebration of Black girlhood. The inaugural chairperson of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University, her study of Black girlhood emerges from over a decade of practice, face-to-face conversations, rituals of dance and movement, and active relationship building with Black girls and women in Saving Our Lives, Here Are Truths, which is lovingly referred to by the acronym SOLHOT.
Thank you, Rebecca and Jamie, for organizing the wonderful weekend that we shared together, as well as this event tonight. I also want to shout out Kevin and Tyler for being in a humility practice together. Thanks always for SOLHOT showing up. And this essay here is for the Carey girls, including those on the call. Zabula Carey Wade, who my family called Aunt Dottie, was one of my grandma Ruth's older sisters. As a girl, I visited Aunt Dottie and Uncle Jack's for family reunions. I relearned the meaning of neighbor and was intimately introduced to chosen family. Family photos were intentionally placed and hung throughout the house, teeming with keepers of Kentucky and Tennessee traditions. I did not recognize them all, but I knew to them that I belonged. The more Aunt Dottie gave, the more she had to give. It was a negation of self that depended on a complete understanding of generosity, divine as trees, gendered feminine outside of patriarchal norms, God-given, disabled, and Black. Carey girls kept house with exacting science and decadent artistry. Each one stretched in a different direction. They kept a profound sweetness in their arsenal and taught new generation of Carey girls their no-nonsense ideas about living through family rituals of gathering on occasions of celebration, mourning, and reunion. Aunt Dottie made power out of delicate tenderness, speculative impairments, and feelings of deservedness too often denied Black women and girls. Ordinary and extraordinary, she formulated humility from generosity so it could not be reduced to something like low self-esteem. Something always grows from the conditions of this world. Aunt Dottie's generosity was sourced from a life-affirming humility that, among many things, works as antidote to misunderstanding. Gossip about for loving too much, Aunt Dottie was born with her heart on the right side of her chest cavity. That was the first explanation I heard of why she gave differently, as if directed by an astral force, and it didn't seem untrue enough to question. In Pembroke, Kentucky, where she was born with a wrong-sided heart that exuded a correcting love, her exceptionalism was felt and lived through touch. You had no idea when you changed and transformed in her presence. You just knew that it happened. That is all and everything to know how her humility means and teaches. The very best given is not to be owned, but added to, and then given away as good weather for flight. Formerly trained musicians want to know what instrument I play in the band. But besides our own creative props, which might be a whistle for me, a white dress on Porsche, Jessica's black leggings, and Blair's DJ equipment, I don't play an instrument in a traditional sense. I definitely do not sing on key or with perfect pitch. The sound is a conglomeration of funk, soul, rhythm, blues, gospel, hip hop, and house. And sometimes I sing, speak, and rap. More than anything, I think we make music that sounds like the gifts we've each been given. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth Nicole. That's beautiful. Mickey Dugay is an artist and director known for his innovative use of animation in documentary film. He was chosen by Variety magazine as one of 2019's top 10 documentary filmmakers to watch. And he is the creator-director of the critically acclaimed Netflix documentary series, Losers. Welcome, Mickey.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Rebecca and Jamie, for putting this project together. Thank you to the fellow contributors who are here with us tonight, and to Literati Bookstore. It's very cool to be hosted by them. Everybody should support their indie bookstores in a time like this. They're a great one. So my essay is called The Loser's Guide to Winning. It was inspired by a series that I made, as Rebecca alluded to, where humility played a central role. The series was called Losers. The premise was that we caught up with some of the sports world's biggest failures and choke artists to see kind of how they felt about their humiliating experiences after a period of years have passed. And the big surprise of the series was that not only had they kind of processed their experience in really healthy ways, but they also kind of used that experience to create an exciting new direction for themselves. So I'm going to read the end of the essay. The beginning, just gets into how the lessons of the show really fly in the face of traditional definitions of what success looks like, as exemplified by athletes like Michael Jordan. So many of the athletes I profiled spent their early lives following our culture's blueprint of success, connecting their value as individuals to their personal performance in competition. When they met with failure, often before large crowds of onlookers, their disappointment came with a permanent loss of reputation. As their losses came to define their careers, the athletes began to see the pitfalls of defining success only through their personal performance. Looking outside themselves, they found new empathy for others similarly dismissed as quote-unquote losers, and considered new ways to define success in their lives. Jean Vandeveld, a French golfer lampooned for his meltdown during the 1999 Open Championship, overcame his failure when he realized that his infamy could be put to charitable ends. These days, he's much prouder of his legacy as a UNICEF ambassador, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for impoverished children, than he is of his long golf career. And he could not be less bothered by his position atop every, quote, great collapses in sporting history listicle. Surya Bonali, a black figure skater, had a career defined by the harsh, racist judges of her overwhelmingly white sport. The judges regarded her unique abilities and approach as inartistic. She narrowly missed winning Olympic medals on multiple occasions and became a pariah after protesting her second-place finish at the 1994 World Championships. Now retired from competition, Surya spends her time coaching and mentoring young athletes of color. While she urges them to strive for excellence, as athletes, students, and citizens, she's also quick to remind them that medals aren't everything. As Bonali says, this obsession can destroy you. Basketball player Blackjack Ryan saw his defiant self-sabotaging streak get him kicked off a series of college teams, undermining a career that could have earned him millions in the pros. Today, he's a member of the Harlem Wizards, performing tricks and sharing motivational messages to audiences around the country. When asked if he regrets his missed opportunities, Ryan told me that his current work is his true calling, bringing him much more self-esteem and satisfaction than anything in his professional past. Arthur Miller wrote that, quote, possibly the greatest truths we know come out of people's suffering. In the year I observed the subjects of Losers, the truth they gained seemed crystal clear. True success has less to do with individual achievement and more to do with selflessly giving to others. Reimagining a culture with healthier definitions of success means dismantling the myth that, quote-unquote, winning is only defined through personal achievement. In a loss-filled year like 2020, where many of us were forced to consider new definitions of success in our own lives, it should be relieving to know that there are those who've survived loss in admirable ways, giving us all new blueprints to find success in our lives. We can start by aspiring to be less like Michael Jordan and more like Jean Vandeveld. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. And if you haven't watched Losers, you're in for a treat. The only bad thing about it is that eventually it ends. It's an incredible series. Lynette Clementson, our next speaker, I'm happy to introduce. Lynette is a longtime journalist who loves helping reporters do their best work. She's worked in print, in digital, in magazines, newspapers, and radio, in the field, and as a manager. She's director of the Knight Wallace Fellowships for Journalists and the Livingston Awards at the University of Michigan. A former reporter for Newsweek and the New York Times, and a former manager at NPR, she is a fierce defender of press freedom. Welcome, Lynette.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to hear everyone's readings and think of our fellow symposium members listening in. And like others, I want to thank you, Rebecca and Jamie, for pulling us together. The symposium was really transformative. And, you know, at the darkest, ugliest moments of the past several years, if I'm trying to catch a moment to be mindful and not be angry about the way things are going, I try to take myself back to that weekend and the things that I learned. So thank you for pulling us all together. My essay for this collection is called Journalism in an Era of Likes, Follows, and Shares. I'm going to start a few paragraphs in and jump around just a little bit. To some, the words journalism and humility might seem incongruous. Holding the powerful to account suggests a certain brashness, yet humility is a cornerstone of reporting, an essential starting point in the pursuit of truth. Take a look in a dictionary or thesaurus. Many of the words associated with humility are antithetical to the bold aims of journalism: lowliness, submissiveness, docility, timidity, diffidence, subservience. These synonyms align more with preserving the status quo than questioning it. But alongside the more servile associations, there is one synonym for humility in some dictionaries that fits well within the journalistic context: unobtrusiveness. Unobtrusiveness, not getting in the way, is an aspect of humility that is critical for reporters, whose job it is to document, interpret, and analyze the world around them. Because journalists are tasked with digging and asking difficult questions, it can be easy to think of journalism as primarily intrusive. But pursuing clarity, stepping back and approaching an issue with a broad set of questions, requires a kind of unobtrusive humility, a belief that understanding something and someone requires patience, curiosity, and often repeated and varied approaches. An unobtrusive posture and approach toward reporting can be hard to maintain in a media landscape defined by branding, influencers, and talking heads. The need for self-promotion to reach key audiences across multiple platforms creates a difficult balancing act for reporters whose work relies to a considerable extent on the ability to recede into the background, to be astute observers, questioners, trackers, and listeners. The pace and pressure in journalism today can leave reporters one impulsive tweet away from a loss of credibility on a daily basis. This is not some wistful ode to the past. I'm not someone who's overly nostalgic about the good old days of journalism or anything else. I have changed my habits in step with the industry. I use social media daily, both to consume information and to share it. For the past decade, I've worked with reporters on expanding the reach of journalism and building their careers in this complex new information system we now inhabit. I extol the many professional benefits of the digital worlds we all now hold in our hands. Information is easier to find, it's easier to check, data is easier to access and sort. Disruption of the journalism industry has cracked open the old system of media gatekeepers, ostensibly allowing for greater diversity and representation of voices and experiences, but it is hard. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lynette. That makes me want more. That was wonderful. I'd like to introduce Jamie Vanderbrook now. She's co-editor of Radical Humility. She's an art and design librarian at the University of Michigan, where she buys all kinds of art and design and artist books for her library and runs a book art studio where you can learn to print with metal type and make books by hand. Since arriving in Ann Arbor, she's been active in the local art and book communities, and she's currently on the board of the Ann Arbor District Library. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm so happy to be here with you all after working on this project with Rebecca and all of you for so many years. My essay is called A Library is for You, and I'm going to read from a chunk in the middle of the essay. So my essay kind of sets up a comparison between two very similar institutions, libraries and museums, and then kind of takes apart libraries into two chunks, public and academic libraries. So I'm going to talk about public libraries in my little excerpt right now. I've never tried to read from an actual book while doing Zoom before, so bear with me. One might ask whether the humble, unassuming attitude that most libraries adopt serves them very well. Libraries contain within themselves the most lofty ideals of a democratic society, but the average citizen would be hard-pressed to articulate that. We think of libraries as being about books or even about literacy, but they're really about sharing. They're about recognizing the value of saving, sharing, and access to society. Public libraries specifically are civic organizations, representing the best of what our democratic model has to offer. Without reminders of their collectively boundless contents, are people very likely to think of libraries as places to seek answers, or even new questions, when faced with a blinking cursor and an empty search bar? To speak to the usefulness of a humble posture, I think we have to examine public libraries and research libraries separately. I serve on our local public library's board of trustees. One of my former colleagues, who gave many years of his life to the board, often boasts that in all his time, he has never checked out a book. He maintains his own large personal library of rare and not so rare books. Why use the library when he has a perfectly good one of his own, he asks. When talking about libraries with people outside my community, I often hear a related retort. Why do we need libraries when everything is online and we can order what we need quickly and cheaply from Amazon? I see in these attitudes a community selling itself short, failing to consider the vast potential they have when working together to share something instead of investing in their own tiny empires. Idealized self-reliance is at odds with the possibility of strength through cooperation. The self-reliant mindset romanticizes capitalism and its trappings, valuing acquisitions and demonstrations of accomplishment. The coronavirus pandemic exposed some of the weaknesses inherent in this behavior. No matter how much wealth or stuff a person might accumulate, there are some challenges that a community can only overcome together. In contrast, cooperation offers efficiencies that independence lacks. People can do more when they share their talents and efforts with each other, and research has demonstrated that diversity makes this especially true. Our current age, though dominated by characters who champion self-reliance, is seeing a rise in library use. A new generation is using the library more than their parents. I would argue that younger people value sharing. They also have a reason to. Younger adults can't expect to own property at the same rate that their parents did, and they are questioning ownership and the pride that comes from ownership. They're also challenging us to recognize the underlying equality of humans through movements like Black Lives Matter and transgender awareness. A focus on community has served the public library well in a society in which young people are eschewing ownership. Even some who have amassed fortunes in the tech sector, for example, have walked away to live simpler lives, less burdened by belongings. They thus become unexpected allies of people who have always depended on community, marginalized and disadvantaged populations. In our community, a recently renovated branch library with elegant, comfortable furniture and a cozy fireplace is an office for entrepreneurs working from home, as well as a place to use a free computer and stay out of the elements. In holding steady to a model of sharing, the public library has become a cultural darling, hosting standing room only sushi demonstrations and Bob Ross painting events, despite echoes of doom still ringing in the ears of those who preached a model of everyone for themselves. So I am the last person to share my work with you all, and I'm going to turn things back over to John, our host at Literati. But before I do that, I just want to thank Literati so much for the opportunity to be here with you all tonight, for posting and promoting and for offering our book for sale. So John, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure to host these events. Thank you for putting books out into this world, even in really difficult times. So it makes our jobs very easy. Yeah, it is Q&A time. If folks have questions, they can send them to me privately using the meeting chat. We only have one question so far, but I encourage you, if you have any questions for our panelists, to submit them. Our first question from a viewer for all of our panelists is, how did each of you decide on your topics? I'm not sure if I should, if I maybe could select someone to go first. Whoever would like to start.
I can jump in. I think around the time that we gathered to start this discussion, it was about around the time that journalists as enemies of the people was being said publicly frequently, and when a lot of antipathy toward the media was really starting to become loud and in many cases aggressive. And most of the people I know are journalists, and so when Rebecca reached out to me, it gave me an opportunity to think about my career and think about, for whatever people see on cable television or people being brash, I actually don't know any people who have gone into journalism to be the center of attention, actually. And I think most journalists actually get into the field because they want to talk to other people, and they actually don't want to be in the story. They want to be the ones asking the questions and finding out about other people's worlds. And so I think the chance to be in this group and talk about these things, I had an idea going in, but by the time we finished the weekend, I had there were so many things that I was thinking and wanted to write down. And so it really grew out of a moment of public hostility and brashness, and a chance to, with a group of people, step back from that and reclaim some space.
I'll share next. So at the time of the symposium, I'm in a band called We Levitate, and I believe they're here tonight. We were playing a lot of music, touring, doing a lot of shows, and I was in deep reflection about our music, our studio practice, and what was making the music sound. Of course, when I received the invitation to come to the symposium and the topic was humility, my Aunt Dottie is one of my greatest and best teachers. And so I thought about how could I put Aunt Dottie in conversation with We Levitate, because I saw our practices of humility as a through line. And then thanks to Rebecca and the editors, Sarah, I tried to make that as clear and interesting as possible of a juxtaposition.
You're mentioning Sarah makes me feel like now I know what to say because I didn't know what I was going to write. I'm really used to helping other people find out things. I don't usually share my own ideas and that are not, within the library context. And so I really struggled with what to write. And I had written something and shared something at the initial gathering, but it's really Sarah Buss, the professor of philosophy, who is, I think, listening on the call today. who pushed me because my arguments didn't really make any sense together. And so like I had some ideas in my head, but I didn't have a lot of practice making an argument because I don't do this very often. And it was sort of hard to think about how libraries fit into this conversation. But yeah, I'm grateful to someone who's done a lot of editing and thinking about, I guess, like testing arguments and pushing them, because I feel like my essay is a lot stronger because of Sarah.
Oh, I can answer next about how I chose my topic. Rebecca initially reached out to me after seeing the series after it came out on Netflix, and we were talking about how kind of the lessons of the series were already in this kind of countercultural space. You know, looking at the positive lessons that could come out of something that is mostly regarded as a humiliating, experience of failure. So, in inviting me to join the group and to think about things in terms of humility, it completely made sense because I felt like so many of the subjects, the thing that I learned as a filmmaker, spending time with these people and interviewing them, was that they really did. I've met a lot of athletes. They are pretty self-directed, self-involved. That does come with the territory of being, world class at stuff. So it's not always surprising. But a lot of our subjects from the series, they had this real selflessness to them that I found to be really uncommon in my experience with athletes. And I think that, with the experiences of failure, there was a humility that it brought them, a perspective that it brought them, that they gained. And so I felt like this was a perfect topic, a perfect lens through which to look at these kind of countercultural lessons of the series. And so, I mean, it's a little bit hard to, writing is not exactly my language, but I'm really glad that I took the time to work with this group to get some ideas down on paper, because I do feel like these issues of humility are so important in the world, especially today, for all the reasons mentioned. And I'm just really proud to be a part of this project, part of this group, and a part of this great book. So thank you.
In some respects, my answer in trying to articulate an answer, it's kind of embarrassing, really, because I stumbled into humility mostly because I had a friend who was cajoling me to apply for a grant. So I'm an academic in part just because I'm insatiably curious. I have things that I really want answers to, and it's a wonderful environment within which to ask questions and search for answers. And one of the things that I'm really, just deeply curious about, I keep waiting for the curiosity to end and it just never does, is how it is that we move through the world responding to the moral challenges that we encounter. How do we deal with the day-to-day challenges of trying to be a good person and trying to make good decisions and trying to deal with things that are often really outside of the realm of our comfort zone. Really, at times they feel beyond us. But I never thought much of humility, in part because often, some of the words, Lynette, in your reading, some of the words that humility is often associated with, it just didn't seem that interesting. And then I had a friend who's like, I'm applying for this grant, it's on humility. Would you like to be involved? And I decided at the last minute to go ahead and be involved. And it was the best decision I've made in terms of my ability to be able to research something, because humility turns out to be just this incredibly rich, multifaceted, so powerful. And, I think our coming together in this, in the first event, the weekend that we spent together, and then in the writing of this book, is just really a testament to how rich and diverse as a virtue it is, and how applicable it is to so many different features of our life, so many different elements of our day-to-day lives. humility finds its way in there, and it constantly teaches us about ourselves and about our relationship to one another. So it's such a tremendous pleasure to not only be able to do the research on it, but to be able to share the results of that and to learn from others in environments like this.
And I think one of the nice things about this gathering and the initial gathering, I think several people mentioned that this was challenging because none of us are essayists, right? I mean, I'm a writer, but I'm not an essayist. I'm a reporter, and so this was all a little bit out of our comfort zones for all of us, and I think that made the exploration more rich, and the fact that we all come from such different backgrounds. I think usually when you participate in a retreat or a symposium, it tends to be sort of people who are already within your bubble, right? People who share your profession. And this was so wonderful because we all did such different things. And I just remember leaning in and just when I got the copy of the book, being reminded of like, wow, yeah, I forgot, that, and how different everyone's experience of life is, right? And everyone's intersection with this virtue, but then you see this commonality. And nobody writes about humility as being lowly or meek or some of these other words, right? We all write about it from a point of strength. And it was just a really interesting exploration.
Thank you. There's a lot of great questions coming in. There's some for specific panelists and some general ones. And for the general ones, well, just whoever would like to weigh in, please feel free. Someone writes, for those of you who teach or work with students, how does humility show up in your teaching?
I'm not sure who teaches. Is there anyone else other than myself who teaches? So I think Rebecca, Jamie, why don't you start that one off?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jen.
I think for me, there's going to be two ways in which it really, really, really deeply has influenced my teaching. One is in the way that the relationship that I stand in with my students, right? So understanding humility just really creates an openness and a capacity to be vulnerable and be present with others in a way that I hadn't quite, developed. And so I'm constantly leaning in, and I'm constantly trying to be open and vulnerable and recognizing that it's a process. But also I think it weighs in because I find ways to teach it. I find ways to introduce my students to the ideas of humility and to the value of humility in their own lives. And of course, I also have the tremendous benefit of being able to have students work in my lab with me to do research on it with me. And that's been a tremendous joy. I think we all have gained so much from that process.
I guess I will say that I have two tendencies when I teach that until I was exposed to a lot of these essays and these thinkers, I thought were weaknesses in my teaching. One of them is that I'm constantly referring to people who taught me. So, I'll say, as I'm teaching, I'll say, my advisor from graduate school used to tell us to, take these risks, yada, yada, or I'd say my, this instructor or my parent. I'm sort of constantly referring to people who I learned from and to the things that they taught me. And, sometimes I'll walk by colleagues' classrooms and they have this sort of like very impressive way of speaking where it's like, the word of sort of like God is coming out of their mouths and all of this wisdom. And I sort of kept waiting for like one day in my, when I taught, like I would be like that, and I would be the font of wisdom instead of constantly referring to all of these other people. But it's only through really reading these essays and the last few years of being exposed to them that I start to understand that in some ways, like that's a strength of mine, that to constantly refer to other people rather than to feel like I have to be the source. And the other thing that I tend to do, that I've done for a long time, is people in my life will say to me, oh, you know, do you know about surrealism, or do you know about this? And I'll often say, no, like I don't know about it, because in my mind, to know about it means to know like a lot about it. And then they'll tell me like, oh, surrealism involves this. And I'll think, oh, well, I know that, but I didn't think that was knowing. And I think also like, you know, again, like thinking through some of these things in the past few years because of the book has helped me to understand that, you know, again, there's not like a point when I become this expert who's suddenly going to say like, I know all of these things, that my sense of knowing is just kind of different. And maybe sometimes a good thing to not be ready to always be an expert in something.
I will follow that, Rebecca, because it's the same way that I'm thinking about it. One of the exciting parts of the essay for me was actually getting to tell the story. So I think it's not an unfamiliar practice for students to make up names about their teachers that they call them behind their back. Or in my case, they told me that they made up a name for me, and that they often called me Sarah Grace, with the name that they would give, and some of them are on the call, to folks who want to know, how is Dr. Brown really? And they would say, oh, you mean Sarah Grace? And so it is, for me, part of my pedagogical practice. I enjoy collaborating with my students, being in practice together, rehearsing together, particularly doing things that I am not an expert in, so that I am learning with, and I enjoy that most. In and outside of the classroom. You can get the full story of Sarah Grace in the essay.
Thank you. Another question for anyone who wants to answer. A viewer notes that it seems that boasting is a form of asking the world, am I good enough? What do you think is the relationship between humility and confidence?
I feel like this is one of those questions that Rebecca and I have been talking to a lot of people about the book, and this is when I would like, my dog just made the funniest noise. This is when I would refer to one of your essays. So I feel like I can think of things that are in Lynette or Mickey's essays for sure that are relevant, but I don't want to put you totally on the spot. But yeah, it seems huge, right? Like, it's like we associate being humble with being meek, I think, probably before you read this book, or with a lack of confidence potentially. But I think the question reveals that it's a lot more complex than that. And being, I guess, existing in a state of humility what can come with that is like the confidence to not boast about yourself. But I'm curious what others think.
I think in my essay, Jamie, maybe what you're thinking of, some of the people who I talk about in the same way as Rebecca, people who I learned from are actually people who in the public, people wouldn't necessarily associate their names with humility, right? The people who exude a real confidence, and in particular in public media, I mentioned Gwen Ifill, Michelle Norris, and Michelle Martin as three women who really had a very strong influence in the way I moved into the public media space, even though I was sort of behind the scenes in the newsroom and they were in front of the microphone or camera. But I think I pointed to them because I wouldn't see any of them as boastful, but they all exuded real confidence, because to me, this part of humility that is, as Jen mentions, just insatiably curious and sort of wanting to bring people into the conversation and enlarge who gets to participate in conversations and who's worthy of asking questions to, and then really listening. Those listening skills. I mean, I think even though those people are all hosts, I think actually what they're great at is not talking but listening, and that takes a lot of confidence. And I I think I write that no one would ever call any of them a pushover or any of them timid, but I see them all as among the most humble women that I know in this way that we're discussing this evening.
Lynette, there's another question here for you. A viewer writes, you've raised exactly the right question about journalism and humility, but I'm curious about your conclusions. How does one stay in this profession and maintain humility? Asking for a friend.
Asking for like every journalist friend I have. I point out in the essay some people who I think sort of very interestingly use social media and public personas in a way that, I mean, I envy and I actually can't manage. Nicole Hannah-Jones, I think, is brilliant in the way that she is able to engage with her audiences and still be very laser focused on what her journalistic goals are. And David Farenthold at the Washington Post, I think, is able to use these spaces, but I can't even pretend to have an answer, but I think for all of us, we have to figure out how to only do what's comfortable for us. It's like Rebecca's saying, she sees other people who sound like they're projecting the voice of God, but I know some of your students and you're excellent because you're you, right? And you do what's comfortable for you. And I think in journalism, what we have to learn how to do is push back against the expectation of the industry, the uppercase, the industry, or our bosses, who may be pushing for one thing for commercial reasons, for a certain number of clicks or feedback, and because it's such a double-edged sword. And I don't know, that's just a terrible answer, but I just think to not veer into things. I don't mean don't take chances, but in this aspect of, if people are asking you to do something that feels boastful, to trust your gut, right? And stick to your whatever makes you feel centered. And I think if we stick toward the inquisitive, curious part of ourselves and not focus too much on whatever that outward projection is, then it's probably more toward right. And if you stick toward that, then you will stay in the profession, because that's why we're drawn to the profession, right? We're not drawn to the profession for these other things that are very thin in nature.
There's something else related to what you're just saying, Lynette, and it ties back to the question about confidence also, that the research that we've done over the years suggests that there's a positive relationship between humility and confidence of a particular sort. And it's the confidence of, it's like, for example, when we're talking about journalism, it's like the importance of the story being told, the importance of the act being done, the importance of good things coming about, where the issue isn't that it was I that did it, that it was I that told the story, that it was I that did the thing. It's like being able to people are oriented to the world in a way, and they're oriented towards other beings in a way that makes the actions that are called for important. And so therefore people will engage in those actions, but it matters a lot less to people that are high in humility that it is them that did it. So somehow the self stays out of the focus in a way that's a lot like the idea of some of the weaker concepts of humility, but it's actually turning it on its head, because you're very in the world, you're very active in the world, trying to bring about things that you think are important, trying to reveal the truth as you see it, trying to create change. But the fact that it's you that's doing it isn't really the point. It's just that it needs to be done. And there's a lot of confidence in that. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe just one more question. And there's so many great questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them this evening. But again, this is for anyone who wants to jump in. Often and disproportionately for women, the viewer writes, it is challenging to hit the sweet spot between humility and not devaluing the legitimacy of one's ideas, especially in group settings. How has your exploration informed your approach to overcoming this, or better supporting those you observe in those scenarios?
It's so interesting that Rebecca mentioned that she is referencing other people all the time, because I have been told that it's very female of me to do that, because I feel like I often do it when I'm teaching, or like, especially I do more of like one-on-one consultations with people. And so like I will be sharing other people's ideas all the time and always giving them credit, because that just seems to make sense to me. But there's research that women are, when they're leaders, they are more held, they're more penalized when they express vulnerability or demonstrate humility compared to male leaders. And so I think it's really interesting, and it sort of ties in with like all this stuff that we see right now about like deleting the smiley faces and the exclamation points from women's emails, before they send them out, so that they're more like men. And like my current feelings at the moment are maybe that we should not be so focused on trying to recreate, like Lynette said, like, so what someone else's comfort zone is. Like maybe that's not actually, we're chasing a value system that's sort of like male and patriarchal, and like instead maybe we should embrace that people communicate in different ways, or that it could be a positive thing to give credit to other people, and not just always be seeking to be the center of attention.
I really want Ruth to jump in here because she works with girls and empowers girls around these.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say too, the sweet spot, I don't know, it's like, what's sweet for me? Like the sweet spot is the giving. And I opened the essay talking about Aunt Dottie's house, which was legendary in its placement of butterflies everywhere. Like we are in the excess. Like that's the kind of the giving that relates to humility, which also I think does relate to confidence. Now, this is inside that space. I'm amazed that she gave and it never gave out. There was a confidence there, because believe me, it could have given out anytime, and it never did. And also, yeah, the sweet spot, it's just what I get excited about. And that's what I was writing to in my essay, is that Aunt Dottie taught me, and every time I see a butterfly, I'm reminded that there's more of us out there. I know Sandra's on the call, and she gives in this excessively humble way that I know then that's my people. Then that's kin. The band is kin. We can make music with it. And so that's the part that I'm excited about, and I try to give my full presence and attention to, following those butterflies in Aunt Dottie's house. And yeah, there are so many people who are in this practice of humility. This is good company to keep.
It is excellent company. And somewhere along the way, maybe it was in the question, it was that women are penalized. I think we would all say that, yes, you may be penalized by somebody else, but you don't have to accept that penalty, right? You don't have to absorb it. You don't, and I guess certainly it might be harder, you know, depending on the power dynamics, but I think more and more, and this is where I find younger women really inspiring, that they're not, like, if you feel like putting an exclamation point, put an exclamation point. If you want to put a smiley face, put a smiley face, right? If you want to have daisies everywhere, have daisies everywhere, and then lead. And don't apologize for any of that. Like, the last time I wore a jacket with a collar on it, like a lapel, was when I interviewed for this job that I have now in 2016. And I promptly took that jacket off, and I'm like, I don't like these jackets with the structure and the collars, and I think I'm never going to wear one again. You know, and I just haven't. And if someone wants to read into that, that I'm not confident or that I'm a poor leader, that's for them to deal with. I don't feel that it's anything for me to deal with at all.
There's a particularly, I think, powerful conception of humility coming out of the Musar tradition, Jewish spirituality, where humility is about occupying your rightful space. So that certainly means that for some people, you know, they need to recognize that they occupy too much space. They talk too much. Their bodies occupy too much space. They center things too much on themselves. But it also means that there are many of us that, you know, it's for us to step up and occupy the space that is ours to occupy. And there's a lot of space for us to occupy. There's a lot of space for women to occupy, where we have things that need to be said. We have opinions that need to be heard. We have, you know, ideas that need to be taken seriously. And it is our space by right to occupy. And that's entirely consistent with humility.
I think too that, you know, we are very curious and also very observant. And I also, you know, humility has currency in different types of economy, which is also why I'm quick to point out that in my essay, you know, I'm talking about a Black space. I'm talking about something outside. I'm already in the otherwise, on the other side of this thing. As soon as you pass those white painted trees in Andani's house, this is a different kind of space. And in other kind of spaces, I don't just go, you know, giving everything away. So there's that too.
I think we could maybe get to one more question. I feel bad there's so many great questions here that I want to try to get as many of them as possible, excuse me. And maybe dovetailing off of something that Ruth Nicole Brown just said, there's a viewer who asked, I've noticed CEOs wearing a veil of humility as they continue to exploit. What is the antidote to cognitive capitalism? So maybe perhaps related to spaces where humility shifts, we see humility being taken on in this perhaps bad faith way. And this, you would like to know how is that counteracted, or how it can be counteracted?
Rebecca, I feel like this is all you. This is your work.
Oh, well, I wish Tyler was here to speak to this question. Tyler Denmead wrote a beautiful poem in the book about humility being kind of abused in a sense and used as an excuse for for taking over and for assuming ownership in a sense. Yeah, I wish he was here. So I think Lynette's referring to some of the work that I'm doing, examining companies like Shinola who pretend to save the city of Detroit when actually they're exploiting the city. And yeah, I think that happens all the time. I mean, that's sort of probably how our country was founded, and you know, a lot of the excuses that were made for why we needed to be in this country and why we needed to commit the genocide that we did. Yeah, I think a lot of words are misused, and humility is one of them. Or rather, a lot of virtues are misused and misdefined, and humility is one of them. I guess I'm curious, Mickey, if in sports there's like any sort of false humility from an athletic perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's been an evolution in sports where I mean, especially athletes who've committed to causes that are larger than themselves. This was very much in fashion in the 60s and 70s, and then after, you know, athletes like O.J. Simpson or Michael Jordan, who really took on maybe a more selfish pose, you know, for a variety of reasons. That kind of ended. But I think nowadays athletes try to be more selfless. They realize that they have a platform to do things beyond sports. You see this in women's sports and in men's professional sports. And I think it's a very, very interesting time when you think about, athletes like LeBron James trying to make a difference in so many different ways with, getting out the vote, being politically outspoken, especially in the last 4 years. I think that there are some athletes who want to be involved and want to do things beyond sports that might be faking it, might not know exactly how to do it in a way that's effective. But it's an exciting evolutionary time right now with how athletes are using their voices and their platforms, and I think being that we're in an evolutionary stage, it is a little bit messy. There is some, falseness mixed in with people that have genuine motivation. So that's to be expected.
Thank you. Well, we have reached the top of the hour, so I think it's time to go. But thank you to all of our panelists for joining us on At Home with Literati to discuss Radical Humility, which you can, of course, buy from Literati Bookstore. There's a link in the chat, and if you're watching us later on YouTube, there's links in the description below. I can't wait to have all of you, panelists, viewers, anybody watching, back in our bookstore very soon. But until then, thank you for making nights like tonight possible. Thank you for joining us. We hope you continue to stay safe and be well, and we will see you at the next event. So take care, everybody. Good night, all.